Hi, I'm Shashank Bhargava, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. In this episode, we talk about India finally acknowledging that there is community transmission and why cases are declining at different rates across the country. We also talk about a Dalit groom becoming the first in his village to ride a horse during his wedding. But first, we talk about the Congress party and the upcoming UP elections. In a major setback for the Congress, senior leader and former Union Minister RPN Singh left the party and joined the BJP. This move came as a shock to the Congress party, who earlier this week had featured RPN Singh in its list of star campaigners in UP. With the state election only 2 weeks away, the question is, how much will this affect the Congress and to what extent it will help the BJP, which is looking to come back to power in UP? To understand this, we speak to Indian Express's Manoj CG, who writes on Congress for the newspaper. And he first tells us that the fact that the Congress is seeming surprised by this development itself has come as a surprise to many.
We are all surprised to learn that the Congress was shocked by his exit, given the fact that speculation about his possible move had been on for some days, although Mr. Singh had been consistently denying that. But in the party circles, it was a talk that he may leave the party, although there was no confirmation on that. So the Congress, I don't think, should be shocked, although they tell us that party is shocked.
Now, when it comes to assessing how big of a setback this is for the Congress, Manoj says that it's actually not that big of a deal, since RPN Singh's influence is only limited to the Kushinagar district, from where he belongs.
So his influence is largely limited to that district, which has 4-5 assembly constituencies. But it's more damaging to the Congress in terms of optics, in terms of perception, both nationally and in Uttar Pradesh. In Uttar Pradesh, because this time the party is going alone. Last time, if you remember, it began the campaign in a big way with its 27 years UP Behal and all that campaign, and finally they ended up having an alliance with the Samajwadi Party. But this time the Congress is going alone in UP, so there is a sense of aggressiveness that the party had tried to inject. So his exit can be a dampener in that sense.
And when talking about the BJP, Manoj says that the decision to take in RPN Singh was a strategic one for them, considering that his district of Kushinagar is an important one.
Because just some days ago, Sami Prasad Maurya, one of the prominent OBC leaders, who also belonged to the Padrona Kushinagar region, he had left the BJP and joined the SP. So they needed somebody, a heavyweight, a local heavyweight, because RPN Singh, this belongs to the royal family there. So he had won as an MLA thrice and a Lok Sabha MP once. So he's a heavyweight in that region, in that district. So they wanted a counterweight to Mr. Swami Prasad Maurya. So the BJP game plan is pretty clear.
Plus, another reason that this won't affect Congress that much is because even officially, it has said that it's not going to come to power this time. However, it is hoping that at least it will be able to play a major role in forming the next government. Though Manoj says that it is important to consider that in the last 32 years, the Congress has not crossed the 50-seat mark in UP. And one reason for it is that while the Samajwadi Party and the BJP have found themselves vote banks and narratives of social justice and Hindutva, Congress really hasn't done that. He says that this is perhaps the reason why the Congress this time has experimented by reserving 40% seats for women candidates in UP.
So it can transcend both caste and the religion-centric politics of Uttar Pradesh. But it has a pitfall in the sense many of these local leaders who are nursing constituencies for themselves and for their loyalists. So now 40% of the seats in one stroke, the Congress has decided to, field women candidates there. So some of the exits are also related to that. Many of the leaders are unhappy because their constituencies, the party kind of reserved their constituencies for women. But earlier this week, the Congress candidate in Bareilly, they've already announced the candidate, Bareilly cantonment, Supriya Aaron. Her husband is a former MP, Praveen Aaron. She left the party and joined the Samajwadi Party. Now, she is a woman candidate. The party has given a ticket. The party's aggressive campaign is on a women-centric politics, ladki hu, lad sakti hu and all. and a woman candidate joins the SP, sending a signal that it is the SP which is the main challenger to the BJP and not the Congress.
Manoj says that the Congress has been forced to do this experiment. They had no other choice. And this can be seen from the fact that they have not fielded women candidates in the same way in other states like Punjab, Goa, or Uttarakhand.
So in UP, the party is forced to do that because they don't have a central plank for revival. So it's a good experiment. It's a refreshing experiment. The results we'll have to wait and watch. But the larger sense that we get when you talk to Congress leaders is that this is not enough. And for the party, this is just a start. Maybe the next assembly elections, the election after that, the party would be able to reap the benefits of its aggressiveness, which is also seen on the organizational level, where normally dormant district units have been revived. There is a lot of organizational activity happening, but it will take time.
Meanwhile, the other thing to consider is that while RPN Singh's exit will not affect the Congress's campaign that much, it is, however, part of the larger narrative of next generation leaders leaving the party, like Jyotiraditya Scindia, Jitin Prasad, and Priyanka Chaturvedi. Manoj says that like these people, Singh was also considered as one of the leaders who would help Congress transition from the Sonia Gandhi era to the Rahul and Priyanka Gandhi era. Leaders who would take Congress into the future.
Like Sachin Pilot in Rajasthan, Jyotiraditya Scindia was in Madhya Pradesh, RPN Singh. Even in Haryana, Ashok Tawar, who was handpicked by Rahul Gandhi and given charge of the state, he was the state president of Haryana. So there are these leaders who the party was banking, whose party was thinking that they will take the party forward in these states and nationally as well. Now, when you talk about the reasons for the exit of so many leaders, there are a couple of arguments here. So the senior leaders, many of them disgruntled, unhappy, they say is that these leaders who have quit are all second generation, third generation Congress leaders. They haven't gone through the grind. They haven't risen up the ranks, be it Sushmita Dev, daughter of the late Santosh Mohan Dev. RPN Singh, his father was a minister in the Indira Gandhi government. Sachin Pilot, son of Rajesh Pilot, Jyotiraditya Scindia, son of Madhurav Scindia, Jitin Prasada, son of the late Jitendra Prasada, Milind Deora, son of Murli Deora. So these are the leaders who got everything on a platter, didn't go through the typical organizational grind that political leaders go through in every party.
He says that these leaders directly became legislators or MPs. And leaders within the party blame Rahul Gandhi for injecting this culture. And they see these leaders like RPN Singh as mere opportunists, moving on to greener pastures when they see a better opportunity.
But that is just one part of the argument. Apart from the people that I've mentioned, there are several leaders who have left the Congress in the last 7 odd years, ever since Mr. Modi became the Prime Minister. That include Himanta Biswa Sarma in Assam, Vijay Bahuguna in Uttarakhand, Ajit Jogi, S.M. Krishna in Karnataka, Narayan Rane in Maharashtra, Giridhar Gamang, G.K. Vasan, Kishore Chandra Dev in Andhra Pradesh, Jayanti Nadarajan, who was a minister in the Manmohan Singh government, Srikant Jana in Odisha, Shankar Singh Waghela, Rita Bhagunath Joshi, Bhuvaneshwar Kalita, Ashok Chowdhury, who was the president of the Bihar State Congress, who is now a minister in the Nitish Kumar government, Pema Khandu, he is now the chief minister of Arunachal Pradesh, Biren Singh in Manipur, he is now the chief minister, P.C. Chako, Chowdhury Birender Singh, D. Srinivas, Manas Bunia, Bishwajit Rane in Goa. So the list is very long. So many of them are not second generation or third generation leaders. Many of them have actually done organizational work and rose up the ranks. So what is the argument for them leaving? And many of them are veterans, not really young as well.
And the argument for these leaders leaving is that they felt that there wasn't much activity going on in the Congress. And the central leadership, especially the Gandhis, were not doing enough to revive the party.
So this is a part of that larger narrative where the Congress is not seen as doing anything aggressively for its revival. The party can't just sit and wait for Mr. Modi and the BJP to commit a blunder, a series of blunders, and wait for its downslide. It doesn't happen like that in politics.
And another criticism that we hear from many people is that Congress doesn't do any groundwork, and people only hear of them before the elections. Manoj explains that some say that even though the central leaders are not doing much, that should not stop state leaders. But state leaders, it seems, look to the central leadership at a time when their organization is in a mess. The questions they ask include, why doesn't Rahul Gandhi travel to more states? Why doesn't he travel as much as, say, the BJP national president?
So this is the argument that some of the Congress leaders give, that Rahul Gandhi should be traveling to every state, at least once a week he should be in some state, meeting the leaders, taking stock of the organizational situation, addressing gaps, if any, and directing the state unit to launch specific agitations. But you cannot blame the central leaders or you cannot blame the state leaders. It's not like either of the one. In the sense, it has to be both doing these exercises, the state leaders as also the central leaders. But the lacuna that many of these Congress leaders themselves point out, that it's most of the time activity beginning in the party when an assembly election is around the corner.
And next we talk about COVID-19. At a time when India is experiencing its third wave of the pandemic, it has finally acknowledged that the disease is now in the community transmission stage. Community transmission is essentially the stage when it becomes difficult to determine who is infecting whom. In the early stages of the pandemic, one can trace an infection back to specific travelers. But after a while, it becomes almost impossible to do that. And that's community transmission. Now, by this description, it would have become obvious that actually India has been in this stage for a long time. In fact, India was criticized for not admitting that it was in community transmission back during the first wave itself. So this acknowledgement is 2 years late. And technically, it is not even a formal admission. When we spoke to Indian Express's Amitabh Sinha, who writes on the pandemic for the paper, he explained why.
So all that has happened is that there is this network of laboratories that is responsible for doing the genetic sequencing of the different variants of this virus. And this network of laboratories, it's called INSACOG. It has a long name. So this INSACOG, generally, it comes out with a bulletin every week. And it is in this bulletin that there is a mention which says the Omicron is already in the community transmission stage in the country. So it's a passing mention in a bulletin that is issued regularly. But this is the first sort of a government document in which we see a mention of India being in community transmission.
So only a passing mention, no formal acknowledgement or statement. But still, this mention is being talked about a fair bit. But would it have any further implications? Would it change India's response in any way? Amitabh says that it does not make any difference at all.
Zero difference, right? In terms of what the response measures that we are taking, in terms of the strategy that we are following to contain this spread, it doesn't make any difference at all. Because whether we acknowledge it or not, whether we have said it or not, it was already happening and everyone knew. And it's not even something, I can understand there's a lot of discussion in the media that has happened over this, but it is not something that probably needed to be discussed, even if it was happening in the first wave, when there was a lot of discussion on this, on community transmission, whether India should acknowledge that we are already in community transmission or not. Even during that time, except for a few weeks at the start of the pandemic, it would have made very little difference.
Especially because everyone knew that this was happening. So it didn't matter if anyone acknowledged it or not. And now 2 years later, it's completely irrelevant. And so we now talk about the thing that is actually concerning people right now. And which is, when will the third wave finally be over? Amitabh says that earlier people had anticipated that cases might go up as high as 10 lakh per day. But it doesn't seem that that would happen now.
So it's possible that it returns from where it is currently, somewhere around 3.5 or maybe 4 lakh cases per day, and it starts to decline from there. Maybe it goes a little bit higher as well from there and starts to return. But it does not seem headed towards the 10 lakh cases a day, which looked like a real possibility at the start of the third wave in India, when the cases were going up rapidly. If you remember, just from less than 10,000 cases to 2.5 lakh cases, that journey was done in 10 or 12 days. So at that point of time, we were headed for a much bigger peak compared to the first or second wave. As of now, it doesn't seem like that it's possible that third wave would have a peak which would be comparable to the second wave or possibly even lower than that.
Apart from cases not going as high as the last wave, the other thing that we are seeing right now is that while cases are rapidly going down in some cities like Delhi, in other places like Kerala, cases are soaring. And Amitabh says that this is mainly because cases in places like Delhi, Maharashtra and West Bengal started surging earlier than in places like Kerala, Punjab or UP.
So different states are in different phases also because the surge started at different times in all these states. It does seem, going by the trends as till now, is that peak is being achieved rather quickly. It's a much steeper peak than first or the second wave. But because it's more steep, the decline is also faster. And again, Delhi and Mumbai are prime examples. Whether the same holds for states like Kerala and Karnataka, we are still to see. Kerala has never followed the national trend. We really don't know about this time as well. But yeah, on 25th of January, Kerala numbers suddenly shot up very sharply. And Kerala is back at number 1 in terms of the daily case count.
Now, when talking about the pandemic, the other thing that the Union Health Ministry had recently highlighted was that there has been a decline in testing in several states and union territories. So would that mean that because of this, we have an unclear picture of the pandemic? Amitabh says no. And this is because while some states might have shown a slight dip in testing for some time, our overall testing numbers have not changed. We are still seeing about 18 to 19 lakh tests being conducted every day. Though he says that test numbers are anyway not a good metric to judge the state of the pandemic right now. Because a lot more people are asymptomatic this time and many others with mild symptoms are not getting tested.
And also, much more than the first or second wave, a lot of people are resorting to home testing. Now, the home testing was not available during the first and second wave. So people did not have that option. In the third wave, a lot of people are actually opting for that. And if they are finding themselves positive, they are isolating themselves without reporting to the authorities. What that means is that the number of people that we are finding positive, the number of positive cases that are being detected, it's only a very small fraction of the total number of cases that are moving around in the population group.
So that means the daily cases being reported are only capturing a small fraction of the cases, even smaller than previous waves. So a better metric to judge the pandemic would be the positivity rate, which is increasing right now.
So of the number of people who have been tested, how many of them are turning positive? And that metric is currently around 16%. It's pretty high. It's higher than at any time during the pandemic, except for a few weeks during the second wave. When at the second wave, it peaked around 22%. But it was in that region for a very small period of time, for about a few weeks during April, May, and June, the positivity rate was higher than 15%. Otherwise, it has remained well below. In fact, mostly for most period, the positivity rate has been below 5%. So that is the thing in the sense that whether we peak around 4 lakh or whether it goes much higher, to compare it to the second wave, we are not in a very good comparative situation because the way we were testing at that point of time, the testing strategy is slightly different now. Not everyone is getting themselves tested. So we do not have a very good idea of how many people are falling. And we don't have a sero survey now, which will tell us what is the extent of the disease in the population.
And in the end, we talk about a wedding that recently took place in a small village in Rajasthan. The name of the village is Chadi, and the wedding was that of a 27-year-old man named Shriram Meghwal. In Shriram's wedding, something happened that had never happened before in the village. And it is actually something that happens in a lot of Hindu weddings. The groom gets ready, wears a sherwani, a fancy turban, and then he rides a horse. And Shriram did all these things. But the reason it was a big deal is because Shriram is from a Dalit community. And even this innocuous act of riding an animal on one's wedding is a major challenge for those in the Dalit community. Indian Express's Deep Mukherjee had attended Sri Ram's wedding, and he tells us about what this meant for him and how this was made possible. Deep, could you first talk about the challenges that people from the Dalit community have faced in the past, when in weddings, the groom has tried to ride a horse?
Yes, so Rajasthan has traditionally been a very feudal society and where caste is deeply entrenched. And Dalits are at the lowest rung of the caste hierarchy. By Dalits, I mean people who are classified as scheduled caste communities. And what has been seen is that, along with other atrocities, in recent times, a specific type of offense has been increasing in the state, which relates to the Dalit grooms riding horses in wedding ceremonies. So traditionally, it was only upper caste people who would ride horses. And the fact that people from the Dalit community are willing to involve horses in their wedding processions is often seen by upper caste people as an act of defiance or assertion of their identity, which doesn't go down well with their feudal mind. So that is why what we have seen is that many times stones are pelted on Dalit wedding processions despite the presence of the police, or the procession is attacked. And at times it has also led to people in the procession or the groom's family or the bride's family getting injured.
Yeah, and even in the recent past, you reported on an incident like this, right? When members from the dominant castes attacked those from the Dalit community after a wedding.
Yes, it was just in November last year, 2 months before, where a Dalit wedding ceremony in Jaipur district was attacked. Stones were hurled towards the procession, and it all happened in the presence of the police force. So that shows a lot about how it has been an issue which has been going on for a while.
Okay, so you wrote about Sri Ram Meghwal's wedding and how he became the first Dalit groom from his village to be able to do that, to be able to ride a horse in his wedding. How exactly was that made possible?
So this specific story is related with this initiative of Bundi district administration and the police called Operation Samanta, which basically translates to Operation Equality. So what happened is that the district administration surveyed all the villages in Bundi district, and they found that in around 30 villages, a Dalit groom has never involved a horse in wedding procession, something that has never happened in all 75 years since independence. So they felt that there was a need to change this, and the administration created Samanta committees in every village involving people such as the local SHO, the Sarpanch, the Gram Rakshak, the police mitra, and their duty is to go to Dalit families and make them aware about civil rights and the fact that how they can break this cycle of societal taboo and the shackles of caste oppression. And they will counsel them and encourage them to involve horses in their weddings, and will also obviously provide security and take action against any person who is found to be creating any challenge towards the ceremony. So, as part of this initiative, the first wedding that took place was in Chadi village in Bundi on Monday, which I attended the wedding and I reported from the wedding. And Shriram Meghwal, the groom, he rode a mare, and that was the first time that a Dalit groom was riding a mare through the roads of that village.
And during the wedding procession, did those from the dominant castes try to create problems? Did anyone there face any challenges?
No, they didn't face any challenges. It was primarily because of the fact that the committee members of the Samanta committee, they had spoken with villages from all communities and convinced them. And the villages were also more or less cooperative. And there is also the fact that the district collector and the SP themselves attended the wedding. So it kind of sent a strong message that the administration and the police are with the family. And even during the wedding procession, around 60 policemen from 3 police stations were deployed. And as I was tagging along with the wedding procession, I could see like men in khaki uniform, policemen holding lathis, all flanking the groom and the mayor, or the DJ and keeping a keen eye on the bystanders and whoever is passing by to ensure that there is no untoward incident.
And Deep, you were part of the procession, you attended the wedding. What was the mood like there?
So the mood was absolutely electric. The DJ was playing songs and there were slogans of Jai Bhim. The stage of the wedding had a very quite big sized photo of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. And there was all this sense that this is something which is a change from the usual status quo, or this is a way of letting people know that there is no inequality in terms of people. The people who attended the procession, they were very happy and there was a celebratory mood throughout.
And Deep, you spoke to Sri Ram as well. What did he have to say about all this?
Sri Ram was very emotional while he was taking part in the procession and even afterwards. And he felt that this step will encourage more Dalit grooms to come forward.
जब ये आज शुरुआत हो गई तो जब भी यहाँ पर कोई भी दलित समाज की शादी होगी तो वो इसी रास्ते से बारात लेके आएंगे। और आप जब घोड़ी पे बैठे थे आ रहे थे उन रास्तों से जहाँ तक पहले कभी किसी दलित समाज के दूल्हे नहीं गए, आपको कैसा लग रहा था? सर ये बहुत ही अच्छी बात है और दलितों को एक समानता का अवसर मिला है। समान मतलब समान जो आदमी को सम्मान की बात है हमारे लिए।
Okay, so this was just one such case, right? And it took considerable effort for it to be made possible. How many such cases of grooms being attacked do we generally see in Rajasthan?
So in the last 10 years, according to the data of the Rajasthan police, there are 76 registered cases where Dalit grooms were stopped from riding horses. So these are cases which were reported and registered. So we can gauge from this that there must be other cases which were not reported. So how serious a problem is this? And the Rajasthan police has also issued circulars directing all SPs and police officials in various districts of Rajasthan to ensure that whenever there is a Dalit groom who wants to ride a horse, every kind of security is provided to the family. So it shows that the problem is very realistic and the police and the administration are trying to tackle it, but it will obviously take some time to completely allay the taboo.
You were listening to Three Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was written and produced by me, Shashank Bhargava, and was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it, share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can tweet us at Express Podcasts and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.